Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. A lot of cautionary tales for us. Let's do it. What was a traumatic experience that could have ended much worse? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
Old dude here. I was young and foolish with alcohol consumption. Ended up blacking out and riding with a friend to get food. When he stopped to get gas, I ended up having to throw up. Panicked and couldn't open the door, so I ended up puking all over myself and his car. I felt embarrassed, and while trying to hide what happened, I took off from the car. When he went inside the gas station, I stumbled across a highway, covered in puke, found my way into a lounge or bar where I was asking for a ride, despite not knowing where we were and not being able to remember my address. Got offered a ride from a guy who took me to his apartment first, and he grabbed a gun. I remember being nervous but confused. We took off. I said, "Where are we going?" He said, "Oh, I'm taking you to meet someone." He drives us to a strip club where he pulls me out of the car and says, "Stay on the ground." He goes in and brings like 4 dudes out and says, "There he is." At which point they all discussed me and threw out dollar amounts. I remember thinking, oh, he must be pawning off the ride responsibility, and they're debating how much to charge me. We leave again, and he stops at a gas station. He's pumping gas and locks the doors. That made me uneasy, and I quietly unlocked the door and trotted into the gas station. The guy yelled that I needed to get back in the car or he'd F me up. I told the cashier, "Hey, I don't know what's happening, but this doesn't feel right, and I'm worried." They let me into the employee bathroom and locked the door. The guy proceeded to ransack the store looking for me and fired a shot through the bathroom door. Later, police contacted me and told me he was arrested and gave me warning signs on what to look out for in human trafficking. Long story. Could have been bad though. Guy insistently following me around my neighborhood outside my student accommodation, getting increasingly annoyed when I ignore his attempts to talk to me. Finally, I lose it, turn, and start screaming at him to F off and leave me alone once he followed me into a busy shop. He freaks out and scrapers. A few weeks later, same time, same place, he starts following me again, asking if I have a boyfriend, if I remember him from last week, why I don't want to be his friend. I dip into the closest shop and start making for the security guard to try to get help. He disappears and I never see him again after that. A few months later, a friend sends me an article. Same guy was in court for assaulting 2 other girls from my building. Difference being, they didn't cause a scene and try to be polite to him. I always feel very grateful to my true crime obsession as a teen, and how much that drums into you, how these people prey on politeness, and most people's unwillingness to make a scene. A man offered me a spot in an art school when I was a kid. I thought I was cool and stuff. Due to moving, I had to decline, but years later, found out he'd done that to other kids, whom he then SA'd. Not traumatic there and then, but I spoke to his son, who told me about the horrors I had unwittingly escaped. He wasn't so lucky. My wife almost died giving birth to our daughter. She had pre-eclampsia, which we had to induce her. While she was already dealing with that, she hemorrhaged while giving birth. The medical staff were all scared. Their voices were shaking as they explained the situation to me. My wife and daughter are both fine now.
We, in a way, almost downplay the danger of childbirth thanks to modern technology and advances in medicine and care. How lethal it was, before modern medicine. But still, thank you to all mothers and women out there that do the most important thing for our species.
I was SA'd by a man I was dating back in 2020. I punched his nose after telling him to stop and yelling at him at least 5 times when he was assaulting me in his apartment. As I'm making my way out, he stuffed his bloody nose with tissue and then runs up on me, gets me in a near headlock, and drags me toward the bathroom. I heard water running in the tub. I threatened him and said I have people in the building right now and they will take him out. After hearing this, he turned towards the door and threw me naked into the hallway instead. 4 months later, he killed his new girlfriend after gaining her trust enough to be in a relationship and assaulting her too. In 2015, a Friday evening, I was having a drink with a friend, another regular of the bar I used to go. Later, I had to meet two friends to try new bars. The guy I was drinking with was invited to a birthday party of one of our common acquaintance. When that person came in, she invited me to the party in another bar a few streets away. Sadly, I couldn't accept because I had already had another plan with my two friends, but I told her we could stop by later, and so we left the bar we were at. I went to meet my friends, and they went to the birthday party location. 1 hour later, we heard fireworks, unusual in the middle of Paris, then military everywhere urging every bar and shop to close and keep their clients inside until further notice. It was November 13th. The day later, as the terrorist attack was all over the news, I checked on my friend, the guy I started the evening with. No response to text or Facebook messages, so I went to his work, a restaurant near my place. That's how I learned. Almost everyone who went to the birthday party were dead. My friend's name was Hyacinth Coma, and I could have been with him. I was almost killed by an elevator malfunction once, but came away completely unharmed. I was at a friend's shitty college apartment building, and a few of us decided to go to the store or something. His apartment was on the 12th floor, so we went to take the elevator. Press the button, doors open, we get in, press ground floor button, elevator starts going down, but without closing the doors. It stopped with about half the car above the landing and half in the shaft, so there was space for us to climb out fairly easily. Being dumb, drunk, and 18, we all hopped out to go to the stairs. I was the last one out. I had only cleared the elevator by maybe 2 feet when it kicked on again, and the car went down. The doors never closed. If I'd been in the middle of climbing out when it moved, I'd have been absolutely killed. Then, we had to go down a pitch-black stairwell because the frat bros going down ahead of us broke the lights on each floor in the stairwell. Moral of the story, don't climb out of malfunctioning elevators, people.
You know, when you say it and tell this story, you're like, yeah, obviously don't climb out of an half-open elevator shaft. But when you break it down, armchair quarterbacking it, probably would have done the same thing if you're with a group of friends and we all did it, so I'm glad you didn't get halved.
When I was 17, I had to drive my parents home from their business Christmas party. The restaurant was 30 minutes away in a city. We lived in the suburbs. I had only been driving a few months and had never driven so late on the interstate or in this city, or had even driven my dad's Porsche. It was nothing like my little VW. My parents were both hammered, but my dad is an alcoholic. I was struggling with directions and getting nervous. I finally get us on the interstate and was talking to myself about the directions. Something I said set my dad off, and he starts yelling at me. I'm begging him to shut up so I can focus. My mom is yelling, and all of a sudden my dad reaches from behind my seat and grabs the wheel. We were like the only car out there at 1 a.m., so no one saw us, I guess, but it probably took me 3 minutes to get control of the car. I could barely see. He's jerking the wheel, trying to drive and screaming at me. I got my shoe caught in the pedals, and I couldn't find the parking brake on the stupid car. Eventually, we wipe out in the middle of the interstate, dead stop. We hit the cinder block wall. We went across all lanes. I'm surprised we didn't go off the side. My mom finally calmed him down and convinced me to start driving again. We got home and the car was busted. He went to sleep and couldn't remember what happened. He had no idea how the car ended up like that. I lied and told him we drove my mom's SUV. They were both so hammered they didn't remember it differently. He's 4.5 years sober now. I had to tell him during his AA process and he apologized, but he never remembered. He did a lot of scary and traumatic things, but sometimes I still hear the brakes and the screaming when I have nightmares. He would have killed us all, but I was driving. When I was a kid, I was swimming in my uncle's above-ground pool. I decided it would be a good idea to weave in and out of the pool ladder gaps. I got stuck in the ladder underwater. No one was around, and I was struggling to get out. My younger brother came to the pool area at the right time and pulled me out of the ladder. It was a plastic ladder, and my brother sort of broke it to get me out. If he didn't decide to come out of the pool, then I would have drowned. I still remember staring at the sky while underwater, unable to free myself before he jumped in. I was robbed at gunpoint on my front step this past New Year's Eve. I was driving for Uber and was getting home earlier in the night so I wouldn't be on the road with drunks or potentially deal with very drunk passengers. It was just before 9 p.m. I pulled up in front of my house, got out of my car, and walked to my front door. Next thing I know, two guys run up on me with a gun yelling, "Give me that shit." I screamed and handed my purse over. They took off on foot. I did get my purse back. The only thing missing was my debit card, which I locked down immediately. They destroyed my phone as well, so I had to get a replacement phone and a new card. I often think about how that could have been so much worse. They could have shot first, stolen later. They could have demanded I let them in my house. They could have kidnapped me. I'm grateful it wasn't worse, but I'm still majorly on edge every time I walk out of my front door. I don't leave the house after dark by myself anymore. The bastards haven't been caught, as far as I know. It could have ended with me and my brothers in his van, most likely never seen again in this world. A guy, older, long gray hair and beard, geetered out, pulled up to our house when no parents were home in a white windowless van. I was the oldest of four brothers at 11. He said he found some bikes that he thought may have been ours. Bike theft was extremely common in this area of California. He was talking to me through my door and wanted me to come out and check the bikes for he had. I told him he could just leave the bikes outside, but I was not coming out. When my dad got home, he was super freaked out and called the local PD, who had recently gotten reports of the same dude going to other people's houses, prowling, and trying to lure other children outside of the house with the same story. That was the day my dad taught me about how to shoot our .45 through a door and kill that effer if he came back. He told me he was a kid eater, which was a way to make sure I ended him in defense of my brothers, but not give me enough details to sicken. I hope that shithead got caught and didn't hurt any children. I lived in Colombia for a few years. I was invited to a little mountain farm, Finca, for a Holy Week retreat. The second night we were there, myself and a friend were chilling in the dining hall skipping chapel. We saw a large man in a black ski mask walk by. We waved at him and he said hi, but he didn't say anything. He looked out the door, then walked back into our kitchen. We heard someone calling us and were all headed into the fellowship hall. My friend put a hat on my blonde hair and shoved me under a table, telling me not to speak English. The finca had been invaded by 3 paramilitaries. The mother of the girl who invited me refused to let any of the men into the hall to look at us. If she had, I would have been kidnapped and held for ransom. Someone snuck a cell phone out into the forest and called the police. It didn't affect me very badly, but it could have been immeasurably worse. This was in 2005 or so, Cali, Colombia, and I was 15. I was hiking on Llewellyn Glacier, not roped up, no crampons, no gear. It was August and very, very warm, and the water rushing under our feet below a layer of ice probably should have given me a clue. I suddenly broke through and almost disappeared into nowhere. I grabbed enough to stop the fall. My buddy grabbed my arm and pulled me out. There was nothing in that hole but endless black and the sound of rushing water. A decade later, I took my son to do the same canoe trip down Atlin Lake to hike to the glacier. Not on this time, and couldn't do it. I got to the lake and saw the glacier in the distance and had a panic attack. We left and toured the rest of northern BC and the Rockies instead. Many years ago, I worked at a pawn shop. Some armed gunmen came into the store and demanded cash and jewelry. They took us, the employees and customers, to the back, told us to lie on our stomachs and to keep quiet. One customer was distraught and kept crying rather loudly. The gunmen kept telling her to shut up or they'd shoot us, but that made her even more hysterical. Luckily, one of my coworkers was able to scoot next to her and cover her mouth. It was already a bad situation, but it could have gone really bad. I've had a lot of issues with buying cars for cash with no inspection, out of poverty and desperation, not straight stupidity. Once I bought a car and my brakes went out going down a mountain, I hit the emergency brake and was able to safely navigate into a lot at the bottom, which luckily was uphill, so I could stop, but it turns out my brake lines were rusted through. Another car exploded hours after I bought it. It had been sitting around for years, and the gas lines rusted out and sparked something. I was driving home with groceries, and I smelled something and saw a fire coming from under the hood. I stopped as soon as possible and ran while it went up in flames. Thankfully, I was far enough away when the windows blew out. Quite literally, 26 years and a day ago, a drunk asshole crashed his car into my bedroom while I was sleeping in it. I don't remember any details. I just remember waking up on the floor in my parents' room with shoulder pain. Took me to the hospital, no other injuries, just a light bruise and a slightly overstretched shoulder muscle. Looked at the scene the next morning. Bed was flipped on the dresser. Vanity on top had broken mirrors. The car was halfway into the room where my bed had been, and I had to gather the Victoria's Secrets catalogs I'd been stashing before my parents saw them.
These are the type of things that, worry me because there's nothing you could do. You're just literally in your safest possible space in your own bedroom, and then suddenly a car drives through it. It's scary. Glad you were unscathed for the most part.
Years ago in my early 20s, I partied a lot. I was living in Denver, but a good friend was hosting a 4th of July party in the mountains, and we had a blast. Later that night, the plan was to crash at his place, but by 1 a.m. or so, and after much booze and other things we consumed, I found myself to be the only person left awake, and I was wide awake. So, I decided to go home. I remember putting on my motorcycle helmet and starting the bike. Then I woke up in bed in Denver and panicked. Not a scratch on me. Ran to the garage to check the bike, and it was fine. I spent the next few days watching the news for any stories about what may have been me driving home, but there was nothing. The drive home from his house was 45 minutes and involved a very narrow, winding mountain road. Completely woke me up to how bad that could have gone for me and anyone else on the road at that time, and changed my partying habits for good. Late 70s, me, the eldest at 12, my sister, and another girl from the neighborhood, we cut through our development into another large subdivision, just goofing off one afternoon. There was a small field between. A white van, I'm not making this up, started following us. I got bad vibes and told them to turn around and head back. The van got to the edge of the field and I could see it was two menacing looking males looking at us. I shouted to the girls to run and not look back. We ran the entire mile home without stopping. I was driving with my mom to practice, as I had just got my permit. I was going to make a turn when my mom just all of a sudden yelled, "Slow down," which scared me and made me hit the brakes in the middle of the road, which wasn't good. So I tried to continue and ended up turning into the little church and hitting a rubber pole. We were inches from hitting a gravestone and seriously damaging the car. It took me a few weeks before I could drive again. That's why I don't drive with my mom anymore.